what I have in here is some seeds. These are seeds I collected while we were out on a walk. And these are the seeds of, well, you can probably tell from that bit. This is the seeds from something in the carrot family, and in fact it's the seeds from Alexander's. I collected these in my pocket when we were doing the Babington's leek video. So I've collected seeds from Alexander's, which is a common coastal plant here, and I'm going to grow some of this in the garden. Now you might well wonder, why bother growing it in the garden when it's so abundant at the coast and I can get to the coast quite easily to pick it? Well, the reason is that what I can't do at the coast is dig it up. And this plant, in addition to the top growth being edible, it's got a celery-like flavour with slight aniseed and its own distinctive flavours. But in addition to that, it has starchy roots that people used to grow and use very much in the manner of parsnips. And I want to try that. So it's illegal to dig up wild growing plants without the landowner's permission, and I don't know anyone who has this growing on their land, so I'm going to grow it in the vegetable patch. So these seeds, that's not a seed, that is a seed pod containing multiple seeds. So I think what we'll do, I might just crack one open and see what it breaks up into. Often with plants in this family, it's not actually possible to properly break open the seed pod without damaging the seeds. What you have to do is plant the whole seed pod and let nature take its course. So yeah, I don't know, that's probably still not a single seed there. That might still be a fruit with multiple seeds inside of it, but let's see if we can crush it and see what we get. It just doesn't want to crush, actually. It's probably going to destroy the seed. So anyway, I'm going to go and plant some of this now in the vegetable patch, and we'll see if we can grow Alexander's at home. Now, I'm not too worried about this being invasive. It is a vigorously growing plant, but it's not something that spreads by its roots like mint or three-cornered leek. So I'm not too worried about that. We're going to grow this in the vegetable patch. It's a horrible day out there. It's blustery and wet outside, but that's not a bad time to plant some seeds. So this particular vegetable plot is a carpet of bittercress at the moment. These are the remaining leeks. I'm growing these leeks as perennials now. In fact, there is one that I cut in a previous video, and you can see that's resprouting, and it's also split. Now there's another one I cut which hasn't split yet, and another one there. But that one that I cut first has split into several plants, and eventually, if we just leave this and we only ever cut the top growth just below the soil, the leeks will produce, it'll produce a clump of perennial leeks that we can just cut as required, and we never have to replant them. We might have to weed around them a little bit. It's looking very weedy. Bittercress doesn't stop growing in the cold weather. This is my rainbow chard, which I'm going to leave, which I've left in the ground because I'm going to see what it does in the spring, see if it comes back in the spring and sprouts some pickable leaves. It is a biennial, so it will probably try to seed this year. And this is where I'm going to plant my Alexanders, in this bit here, which I've just weeded and turned over. And so that is just going to be sprinkling the seeds into the bottom of this drill like this, and over this side. That's probably too many, but what I'll probably do is thin them out, and we can use the thinnings as some leafy vegetable. And then I'll just gently cover those over. Ideally these should have been planted in autumn. It would have been better if I'd planted these when the seeds were ripe, but they'll still grow, I think, now. So again, we'll cover over at this side. There we go. And then I'm going to mark that at both ends of the drill with a label, and then a cane along there just to mark that there's something in there, so Jenny doesn't accidentally weed them. This is interesting. This is coral spot fungus. on these twigs that we cut from the woods. It doesn't do anything. It can be a bit of a pest on trees. It can be a bit of a disease of trees, but it's here. There's not very much point trying to control it. Yeah, coral spot fungus. The remaining Alexander seeds I think I will plant around the back of the house. We've got a bit of rough ground around there, and I'm just going to toss them in the grass around there and see what they do. And right on cue, the rain has started to fall, so my seeds are going to get a good watering in. It's not like the soil's very dry there, but yeah, they're going to get a nice watering in, and hopefully they'll sprout in spring, and then in autumn this year hopefully I'll get to dig a few of them and we'll get to taste a root vegetable that I have never tried before. The rhubarb. Look at all the little buds on the rhubarb here. So I think it might be time to get the bin on top of there to start forcing it. So I've got an old dustbin that we will put upturned over the top so that we can force some rhubarb stems. My walnuts and sweet chestnuts, which I've got down here by the greenhouse, I'm just keeping an eye on these bits just to see if I see anything sprouting. There are some things green sprouting in that pot, but they're weeds. I will just look to see if there's any green shoots coming up from the walnuts and sweet chestnuts, and as soon as I see anything happening there, I'll take the pot out and we'll look after it properly. But hopefully there are nuts sprouting under the gravel there. I was shopping the other day and we found a mountain of parsnips reduced. So these were reduced in Tesco. This bag was 89p. This bag was £1.05. That's a lot of parsnips for not a lot of money. I'm going to freeze a lot of these today, but I'm also going to do something with the skins. So normally with parsnips I would buy as many as we need and I'd peel them. The peels would probably be composted and I would parboil them and roast them as part of a roast dinner. I'm going to do that with some of these today, but there's way more than we can use in today's meal. So we're going to parboil and freeze most of them, and I'm going to try to make some crisps out of the peels, which does mean we're going to have to give these a really nice good scrub. They're very nice and clean, but we'll give them a good wash first. So the sink has been sanitised and scrubbed. Normally, I don't know that I'd even bother washing these, because if I'm peeling them anyway and I'm not going to eat the peel, then I'm not sure I'd bother washing them. These have clearly already been washed between field and shop. However, because I'm going to eat the peel today, we are going to give these a good scrub. A rubber glove is just to protect my plaster on my thumb, which is to protect your eyes from my unsightly thumbnail as it's healing. It's got to the point in the healing process where I can't really paint it anymore, so it's covered up with a plaster for aesthetics. So yeah, I'm just going to give those a little bit of a soak and a scrub, and then drain and dry. And we're going to do this with a batch process because that will be more efficient. So to start with, all of the decent pieces of peel from these parsnips are just going to go into that bowl there. And I'm not going to top and tail because that would mean putting down the peeler. So we'll do this, as I say, in a batch process because we've got a lot of parsnips to get through. Not all the easiest parsnips to peel, and in case you're wondering why I'm using this design of peeler, it's because this one's the one I use a lot, and most of my muscle memory is adapted to this peeler. A speed peeler is only a speed peeler if you're accustomed to using it. There are some that are not quite so nice, so those peelings will go in the compost, or at least the bad bits will. The nicer bits can go in this bowl. That's the general idea anyway, so I'm just going to smash through this batch of parsnips. Back in a moment when that's all done. So there we go, we got a big bowl of nice parsnip peels. We got a big pan full of parsnips that still need a bit more work done, and very little waste so far. I am going to probably compost the tops and tails of those parsnips. I could put them in the stock pot, but I'm probably going to put them in the compost bin. the mouse in the compost bin needs to eat too. Now I'm going to dress those with a little bit of olive oil, some black pepper, a bit of salt. I'll just toss those around to get those things distributed. It could put some paprika on there, or curry powder, or other things. Or we could do that when these are cooked. That's good. It's pretty well coated, I think. And then that lot's going to go onto this tray, which I've lined with baking parchment. There's enough here that I really probably should spread that on 2 trays. Yeah, I think I might do that actually. Okay, those will probably need about half an hour or something. I'm doing this at a time when I would be warming the oven up anyway for a roast dinner, so not all of the heat that we're using for this is going to be wasted. This is going to be a session of cooking. So now that part's underway. I can top and tail these parsnips. As I say, yeah, the tops and tails are going to go in the compost. And then these will just be cut into pieces for parboiling, the kind of pieces I will use for a roast dinner. So roast parsnips as an accompaniment for, a roast dinner. I normally have them in pieces about that size. Not even slightly concerned about the odd bit of skin that's on there. It's fine. They do roast nicer if they are peeled. So this is just now a batch process to top and tail these, cut out any bad bits. They're actually pretty good condition considering these were reduced. I assume they'd just gone out of date rather than actually looking bad. Or maybe they had the next batch of parsnips coming in and they had nowhere to put them. So yeah, this kind of batching process where you do, with a big batch like this, doing all the peeling first and then doing all of the chopping is probably a bit more efficient. If you can imagine, peeling a parsnip, putting down that knife, picking up this knife, chopping it up, that is probably, over the process of, 50 parsnips or however many we've got here, it's probably a few minutes of wasted time. Right, anyway, back in a moment when this is all done. So that lot there is prepared parsnips. That pan is nearly full to the brim. That'll just go on the stove. We'll bring that to boil, simmer for a couple of minutes just to parboil those. I'll talk about that in a moment. That is the waste. That's going to go to the compost bin and it will be composted down. But as I say, the mouse in the compost bin needs to eat as well, so that's not a waste really. Fun fact, when my daughter was little, she wrote a story about a mouse that lived in the compost bin, and it was a little mouse called Yucky Mouse, and he didn't want to be the same as all the other mice and eat the stinky, dirty food that was in the compost bin. He wanted to be a chef. You might recognise that story, but she wrote that story several years before Disney published the movie Ratatouille. The trouble is we can't prove that, and I think even if we could, Disney has deeper pockets for lawyers than we do. But there you go, my daughter actually wrote the story of Ratatouille before that film existed. It's just it wasn't a rat called Remy, it was a mouse called Yucky Mouse. Like I say, we can't prove that, but we know the truth. I took my eyes off these for a moment too long, and they got a little bit too toasty. But there's only been 10 minutes, and you can see how much they've shrunk already. I've turned the oven down. I'm going to put these back in and cook them a bit lower so they dehydrate rather than burning. I suppose if we left this a bit longer, we'd probably have parsnip coffee. So those parsnips are now on the boil, and I'm just going to turn that off now because that is as much as they need. They just need to be brought to the boil. I'll turn the ring off. I'll just let those sit there for another minute. That's really all they need. And this is just to blanch the outside, so it does help with roasting them. It helps them to crisp up on the outside, but it also makes them freeze more easily as well. Blanching vegetables in order to freeze them, usually by briefly dunking them in boiling water, or in this case parboiling them, improves the keeping qualities of vegetables when you freeze them. And because we really do seem to be on a waste not journey here, this liquid from boiling the parsnips, at least some of that, I'm going to save for making the gravy for my roast dinner. I'll probably use that for deglazing the chicken pan, and then it'll go back in the gravy pan with all the bits it picks up from the chicken roasting pan to make the gravy. And I'll just let them drip and steam and cool down a little bit, and then they'll be nearly ready for freezing, most of them. The parsnip crisps, I don't know if these are going to be crispy or not. They are. They did seem a little bit soft when they came out of the oven, but we'll see, because they might just need to sit and lose their moisture. They are a little bit more toasty than I really wanted them to be. But anyway, let's taste a bit and just make sure they don't taste burnt. Yeah, they taste all right. To assist with that cooling process, I'm going to transfer them onto this rack, which I've covered with a fine mesh to stop them dropping through the holes. Hopefully there the air can flow around them and through them, and they'll dry out properly as they cool. And then those parboiled parsnips, I'll spread them out in a single layer on this tray. Those are the ones we'll cook today. This is reusing the same parchment that I used for the parsnip peel crisps. So yeah, I'll just spread those out on a single layer on that parchment. That will just make it easy to freeze them. I'm going to let them cool first. Obviously you can see there's a lot of steam coming off of that. I will freeze that on the tray, and then I can shake them off there loose into a box or a bag, and then we'll be able to use them in whatever quantity we need once they're loose frozen. If I just put them all into a container and froze them, it would just freeze into a block. This will freeze them loose as individual pieces. So, parsnip skin crisps. Now, you might notice a few of these are missing already. They're good. They taste almost exactly like those root vegetable crisps you can buy in the shops, and why wouldn't they? That's what they are. Right, so there we go. A couple of hours in the freezer. Those are now hard. And because I've frozen them loose, I can take out as many or few as I need for future roast dinners. Now, I wouldn't normally bother preparing and parboiling and freezing parsnips like this. I wouldn't normally bother doing this, but they were such a bargain that it was worth doing it. That will just streamline some Sunday dinners at some point in the future. And these won't even need thawing. These can go straight in the roasting pan, straight into the oven, and they'll cook from frozen. There is a tiny little bit of Christmas still left in this room. I didn't notice this until just the other day. This is the little pomander that I made before Christmas from one of my little calamansi oranges, and it's completely dried up. The cloves are now already sticking out, and actually the elastic is quite loose on it now. And it does smell of cloves and faintly of orange. It's always Christmas somewhere in the world. Can I open a bottle of my cider? This is the honey finish cider. This is one I haven't tried yet. So this is an apple cider that I made last year, and when I bottled it, I put about a teaspoonful of honey in there, heather honey, and it immediately settled the sediment. The other varieties of cider that I made from the same batch have not cleared like that. They've stayed cloudy. Not a problem, but that was interesting. Now the sugar in that honey should have caused this to ferment a bit further in the bottle, and that should have carbonated it, which means when I open this it's going to fizz in theory, which means I have to pour it before that sediment gets all stirred up by the bubbles. So here goes. Whoa, well, it's lively, and we'll get it pouring. We'll get a pint poured at least before that sediment comes out. There's nothing in that sediment I wouldn't want to drink, so I will use the rest of that probably for cooking. I might cook some pork chops in cider with the rest of that. Meanwhile, however, let's give this honey finish cider a taste. You can see bubbles, so we've got good carbonation. Now that's tasty. It's not sweet. The honey has not sweetened the cider because it continued fermenting. It's fermented all the sugar. But the aromatics in the honey have persisted. So this has got a fruity, floral, citrusy, quite a complex flavour. That's very good. This video is sponsored by wall Pennywort. I mentioned this in a previous video. This is my wall Pennywort that I planted in a tiny cavity in the wall here. This plant here flowered and set seed last year. In fact, there's the flower spike there. And look, that's wall Pennywort, that's wall Pennywort, so's that, so's that. The seeds have found their way into the little crevices. I suspect if we look around we might find some more. I may just pick that off and move it somewhere else as well, because I imagine there are still some seeds to shake out there. Maybe we'll put it on that little crevice just there and give it a tap. And perhaps here. But yeah, delighted to see that this plant has started to establish here. I'm just going to go and have a look at the other ones. I don't think the other ones, although they did seed, I don't think I've seen any seedlings there, but we'll take a look. So these plants here did seed last year, but I can't see any seedlings around. But they're coming back nice and strong. There's some lovely, fresh, new growth on there, despite the fact that we're in the middle of February and it's freezing cold. This plant seems to do well in cold, especially wet conditions. It's been raining almost constantly. Today's the first time we've seen the sunshine for a while. And similarly, this plant here is coming back nice and strong. I think one or the other of these two did flower last year. But again, I can't see any seedlings around here, but they're tiny to start with, so they might be around somewhere. While we're out here, I'm just going to check on my chestnut and walnut seedlings. Nothing yet. It's still a little bit early for those to be appearing, but we'll keep an eye on those. I can't even remember what it was I planted in that pot. I should have labelled it. Oh, I did label it. Quince. I couldn't remember what was in it, but I also couldn't remember labelling it. So yeah, that was some Japanese quince seeds. Hopefully those will sprout as well. It's still a little bit too early for any of these, but I'll check on them on a weekly basis or something. This is not sprouts coming up, this is pine needles from an overhanging tree. No sign yet of my Alexander's seeds coming up in this drill here, but I'll keep an eye on that as well. The leeks that I've been cutting, well, you can see they're coming back. This is one I cut and used. That's one I cut just the other day, and over there. But yeah, they're taking okay to being managed in this way. And you can see this one here is now divided into a little clump. And that's what will happen. This will fill out with leeks. We'll probably have to lift them and divide them and replant them periodically. But if you don't mind eating mostly just the green part of the leek, then growing them as perennials like this and just cutting them just below the surface and leaving the roots in there is a really effective way of getting more crop for the space. If you really like the white part at the bottom of the leeks, then obviously you have to dig them up. I am enjoying the spring flowers though. We've got some lovely primroses coming out here. We've got crocuses, have just gone over a bit there. More lovely crocuses in all different colours. Some little blue anemones. More primroses over the back there.
It seems that once again I have a requirement for something that doesn't exist. This is the GoPro that I use for a lot of the outdoor shots in my videos. And it's very convenient to be able to use it with this handle. This is called the Shorty handle. It's actually an extendable selfie stick style thing, so it can be used as a selfie stick. I can just about use that to get the camera far enough away that I can do outros and things like that. It also very conveniently turns into a little tripod, and you can use that in the extended or collapsed version, so it's quite useful for standing it up if I want to do a shot where I'm walking away from the camera or something like that. And of course it functions as a handle to use the camera for when I'm walking. It would be convenient to be able to clip this to like a chest mount so that I can use both hands to present something or open something on camera when I'm outdoors. It's possible to do that. You can get chest mounts for GoPro. But all of the GoPro ecosystem for mounting requires that you do this. You have to unscrew that screw there. You have to wiggle that handle off, and then you've got these two little tongues here which on the GoPro 10 fold down if you want them to. And then you can bolt on some other mount. It can be a helmet mount, it can be a thing that goes on a pole, or you know, all sorts of different mounts. But doing that is sort of inconvenient because it's just fiddly. And if I've got one camera, like I have, and we're switching between shots of walking and whatever else, I don't want to be doing this every time I want to change the mode of use. It seems a shame that they don't just make things that act as a holster so that this thing goes into them and you can continue using it in a mounted form, and then take it out and use it as a handle when you want to. I did make a thing that goes on here that puts that converts this metric screw into a 1/4 inch tripod screw hole, so you can put clips and things on the side here. I've made a thing that makes this so it can clip onto my walking staff, for example, the walking spoon. That's pretty useful in certain contexts, but what I want is a chest mount or something similar that has a holster on it that can just accommodate that handle and hold the camera like that. You can't get them. They don't exist. You can get selfie stick holders that go on a rucksack, on a backpack strap, but they're not crocodile clip type things. They are clips that go round something and then clamp shut at both ends. They'd work on a backpack strap, but what you wouldn't be able to do is clip that to clothing or something, or some other edge of an object. So I'm going to see if I can make one. There's this. This is a unbranded clip. Now this is for GoPro, so that you know this screw comes out. I could put the GoPro on there, and this has a really strong clamp, so you could clamp that to clothing, or you can do it the other way around. It's got little detents here, so it can be moved easily enough. So I could clip that to my clothing. I could mount my GoPro there, turn it back, and I've got something that I can clip on my jacket, for example, and have the GoPro on there. But now I have to take it off the shorty handle to do that. And there's this, which is not specifically a GoPro mount. It's a multi-bicycle clamp. And this is actually, I think, intended to clip onto handlebars and then to put a torch, that is a flashlight, in the other bit. And again, it's got little detents for angling it. But what I want is that with one of these on it. So I'm just going to take them apart to see if I can cobble them together in that fashion. I have a feeling that they might just fix together. If we're really lucky, the design of these detents will be compatible. I don't suppose that will be the case. No, so this has got little dots that engage with those little sprung tabs. There is a captive nut in there, which I'm going to try to keep in place. And then I want half of this thing. So somewhere in here, wrong end, there's another screw, different size, I think. Yeah, this bit hinges down. Not thrilled about the way those just fall out, but we'll deal with that later. So yeah, there's again, a screw holding the two halves together. So let's get that out and separate half of this. Okay, so we've got choices here. We've got a... Okay, that's the detents work in a different way, so that's not going to be compatible with that, but that will fix on there. It won't have the ratcheting detent, but it will fit on there. I think I'm going to need a longer screw than the one that came out of there, though. Yeah, that's fine. I'm sure that will be a metric screw. Let's go and get my box of screws and see if we can put this back together. That's the screw we're replacing.
So that looks like it's going to be an M4 screw. Here's my big box of metric screws, and I think let's have a look. Yeah, so there's a slightly longer, well, twice as long M4 screw. I think that might actually be the one. Now there are two halves to this thing, and they're not the same. To make it most compact, I could probably shave off that bit there and use that, but this one does actually kind of clip in place. I don't want to extend it too far out this way. There's this middle piece as well, which is part of this whole thing, and obviously that would go on there, but I don't want to extend it too far out this way because then it'll give it a turning moment. Anyway, let's just see if that is the right length to go through there. Assuming I haven't pushed out the captive nut that's in there. I have. No, I haven't. It's just gone a bit further than I thought. Yeah, no, actually that might be too long. I wonder if the original screw would fit actually through this bit. There's quite a recess in there. Let's just try. Maybe I didn't. Oh, that's no good. Now that's why. That screw. That's no good. Okay. It does fit through that bit. Let's try it on here for the moment. I think if I use this bit, I will have to shave off that little bit there. But we'll see. Not long enough. It's not engaging with the captive screw. Oh, that's because it's going through the captive nut that is there. So let's push that out. Okay. So yeah, there was a captive nylock in there. I'm not very sure that this screw, this captive nut in there is actually a locking nut. I don't think it is. So if this turns out to work loose over time, I may have to replace that captive nut in there with a nylock. Okay, well that appears to work. That has given me the desired configuration. Let's push these back in. A little bit concerned these might just fall out and get lost. Is that meant to go that way or that way? Does it even matter? Yeah, I think that's meant to go that way, because whereas here it clears that hinge, here it has to clear that latch. So we put the latch back together. Make it about the right size for the shorty handle. So it's about there, and then when I close it, I want it to lock. So a bit more. Pretty good. And then that should go like that. I still think that might be a bit front heavy. Maybe that's why these don't exist. Anyway, we'll give that a try. I will try that on a rucksack and we'll see if that functions as a shoulder or chest mount. Yeah, it might just be that this front piece, this front assembly is too heavy with this handle. Other people would solve this perhaps in other ways. It's worth mentioning. One other way to do it would be just to buy another GoPro and have one that's on a chest mount and one that's on a handle. I suppose actually people with 3D printers and the skills and time to develop their own solution might print something. But I don't have a 3D printer and I haven't yet found the time to get into all of that. So my solution is usually to try to cobble something together, as I've done here. Anyway, let's go give that a test.
just a dummy load in my backpack at the moment, just for testing. So let's have a look and see if that actually works. Yeah, I think so. I mean, that can be angled. I can do stuff. It is a little bit loose that way, so perhaps I need to do something about that. Okay, so that mostly worked. There are a couple of issues. One is that it is just top heavy, so it does have a tendency to tip forward. The solution to that is probably to make sure that this thing is securely fixed in there and just hang it that way up. The GoPro doesn't mind which way up it is. If it started in that orientation, the footage will just come out exactly as normal. If not, it can be easily flipped in the edit. So yeah, that would probably work, because then that'll sit against whatever surface it's clipped to. The other issue is that this is just a little bit too swingy, and the reason for that is most likely to be the union of those two pieces of plastic, which were never designed to go together, of course. So that little protrusion there doesn't interlock with that piece there, and I think probably the answer is just to trim one or the other of these off. That one looks like it's probably the easiest to remove. I could go and get a drill and drill that out, but actually what I'm going to do instead is just shave it down with a sharp knife. Let's just see if that's any better. Yeah, that's just got more mating surface. In fact, I might put a rubber washer on there just to give that some grip. And I may regret this, but I've actually pushed out the captive nut that was inside here. I may regret this because it might be quite difficult to get a new one in. That's the captive nut that was in there. It's just a regular nut. What I want to do is put in a nylock, a locking nut, because this will not work loose. That's an M5, this is an M4 screw. I suppose we could use an M5 screw. There's no reason why we can't just reuse that. If it'll fit in that cavity, it probably won't, because that's probably engineered to fit an M4 nut. Yes, it is. Okay, so I will go and get an M4 nylock. I've got some in the garage. I'll go and get an M4 nylock, and we'll try and wangle that into place.
All right then, so nylocks. Is nylock a brand name? Should I be saying nylon locking nuts? Okay, that's an M4. That nut will have to go back out in a different box. We've also got here some washers. So I think they have a rubber washer that fits round close enough. Yeah, that'll do it. And that'll give it some grip. Okay, let's try that. That's an M5 actually, that can go back in this box. So that can go in there. Waste not, want not. So yeah, this might be a bit tricky to get into place, because I could push that pin out, but then I've got to deal with this weird spring, and I really don't want to do that. So I'm gonna peg that open using the box from the other thing, and see if I can just get my finger in there to place this. I was going to snap shut on my finger like a mousetrap. Let's just see if we can get it in place. It's got to go in a particular way. It's got to go in the wider side first. Let's try that again, shall we? Would help if I had more slender fingers than this. And also, this is really quite uncomfortable to prop open this toothed set of jaws here, but never mind. Should I push out that pin? This spring is so fierce, I feel like I wouldn't get that back together again if I did. I could go and clip that end in a vise, I suppose. But I'm just going to actually spend a little bit more time just trying to get it right. I'm going to cut here, and I'll come back when I've got that in there.
Okay, for the record, the way to do that was prop it open with the box, and then I just held the nut in there well, I got the first threads engaged, and now I should be able to pull it down into the captive slot. And it will jam down in there. Yeah, so that's now wedged down into the captive nut recess. I can take that out carefully. And now I can put the rest of the stuff together. Where's that rubber washer? There. Right. So that screw goes through there. The rubber washer goes on there. That goes into there. And we tighten it up. Okay. It's just resisting now because I've got to the locking part of the thread, but that's fine. I'll tighten it all the way up and then back it off a little bit, and that should just give me enough slack to turn it, but there's still resistance there. That's good. Maybe a little bit more. Yeah. Okay, that's what I wanted. So that rubber clip can go in there. Okay, so that's nice and secure on there now. That can be closed up. I'll get it to the right size for the thing. Is it already there? No. Just turn it up, just screw it up a bit tighter. So that goes in and out of there without too much trouble. And when we clamp it down, no, it needs another turn. So one more turn. So that still slots in and out of there, and then clamps down. This cam lock here doesn't really have an awful lot of action. Anyway, so there we go. I've got now a clip thing that can clip onto my belt, for example. You know, it could go at waist level, or it can clip onto the lapel of a jacket. And as I say, I think we might end up using it in that orientation, so that we clip it on to something like that, and the camera just sits down like that. But that is pretty much done. God, that thing is quite fierce. Look, it's made marks on my fingers. But that's what you need to clip it onto things and for it not to fall off. That's that. So that thing that I actually asked about on Does This Exist on Reddit and didn't get very much response, now does exist because I made it exist. Is that a good idea? Time will tell. I'm going to take this out and field test it on a ration pack video, I think, and we'll do some chest-mounted kind of video where I've got both hands free to open packets and things like that. I had the opportunity to go back to the Portswood International Food Store yesterday. I was actually looking for some Kaumakli yogurt, which I used to get there and I used to really enjoy. Unfortunately, they had none in stock, but what I did find was these magnificent shallots. Look at the size of these things. Now, you might be thinking, that's not a big shallot, that's just an onion. Shallots and onions, same thing. They are varieties or subspecies, I think, maybe, of the same plant. So anyway, I'm going to just make something with this today. I also, while I was there, got some kashkaval. This is a stretched curd cheese from a very, very wide geographic region. In fact, it's probably easier if I put a graphic on the screen to sort of show where this comes from. It comes from like Bulgaria and Turkey and all sorts of, yeah, a huge geographic region. This is made with cow's milk. I think traditionally it's made with sheep's milk or a mixture. But it's a stretched curd cheese, so it's a cooked curd cheese. So it has something in common with low moisture mozzarella. Hold that thought. Got some lovely red chilies, sort of cayenne type red chilies. And some lovely naan bread. So this is not going to be pizza, but it's going to be not exactly not pizza. So my gigantic shallot, I'm just going to cut these up. Starting to divide in there actually, so we might just have a little bit of papery skin to remove from some of these bits here, but that's fine. That's how onions do. I'm going to keep these in quite big pieces like that. I think we'll give these a little fry to caramelize them a bit first. We'll get those going. A bit of olive oil. And I think a bit of butter too. I mean, partly because I think that's a nice combination, but partly because these other ingredients that I'm using here come from a region that spans the use of olive oil and the use of butter. While we're waiting for those to cook, let's go and have a look at that cheese. So that's what it looks like. Quite a hard cheese. Quite rubbery. Very mild. Not especially cheesy, but nice. You know, quite a mild tasting cheese. So my onions over here, already starting to soften and caramelise. I've got them on full heat here, and I'm just going to keep them on the move. I say onions, shallots, same thing, as I say. You can see lots of steam coming off here, and that's also desired because I want to drive some moisture off of these. I want to make them, condense them down, make them a bit drier so that they don't make the bread too soggy. Now I haven't put any salt in here, but that was salted butter. And the cheese itself is very salty, so that's why I haven't seasoned this as such, but I'll just keep going until these get to the desired level of caramelization and reduction. So even though the process here is reduction, and we are trying to drive the moisture off here, and even though this is a ceramic non-stick pan, there is caramel from the onions sticking to the pan. So every now and again, I'll just put a little splash of water in the pan, deglaze that, and then get that caramel back on the onions. So we're not going to leave it in the pan. And then we'll reduce again to drive off that water I've just added. But I think we're nearly there now. My oven is preheating to 220 Celsius. I'm going to have one of these lovely naan breads. Don't know if we want all of the onions on there. We'll see how it goes. Let's just spread that around, see what it looks like. I think that looks like probably about enough. I'm just going to have a little pinch of my Spanish thyme. And then some of this cascaval cheese. I'll just stop there for a moment because I want a bit of this chili as well. I'm going to slice this really nice and thin. I'll just taste one so we can get a gauge on how pungent these are. Fairly mild. A little bit of fire, but fairly mild. Really fruity. I think one's probably enough though for this thing. And then just a bit more cheese. We are only grating it on, so it's going on quite thin. But a little bit of cheese just over the top of those chilies, just to hold them in place. Then that's going to go on the top shelf of the oven. Probably only going to need about 10 minutes. So that in there. Yeah, and I reckon 10 minutes. Okay, I'm pulling that after 8 minutes because that's as done as I want that to be. So I did turn that round halfway just to make sure it cooked as evenly as possible. That's way too hot to eat at the moment. So while we're just waiting for that to cool for a minute, let me show you these other things I found. These I picked up in a charity shop on the same visit up to the Southampton area. Not as old as they look actually. They look kind of 1970s style, I think. But these are Frida from Habitat. I don't think they're that old, but they're gorgeous. I just absolutely love them. They're little spice jars. And these will find a home on my shelf above this area I'm working on the moment. Okay, that might have been enough delay just to get to a point where we can give this a taste. That didn't work. Okay. Just going to cut kind of wedge of that. So yeah, it holds together. The cheese has glued the other things onto the crust. A little bit of flex still, but a crispy, crusty edge. Let's give that a try. Hot, simple flavours. First bite, it feels like tomato is missing because, you know, pizza's nearly always got tomato as the base sauce. But then the sweetness of the onions is there and it's just gorgeous. And that cascaval does have Well, I didn't put a ton of it on here, but it does have a bit of a cheese pull. Like I say, not pizza, although maybe having something in common with the precursors to modern pizza. Good for many of the same reasons. And I'm not presenting this as anything authentically anything. This is just, I saw some lovely ingredients and decided to make this. Welcome to the comment positivity section. This is just a collection of nice and interesting and curious and insightful and uplifting comments from underneath the videos on my channel. So first off, on the Lithuanian combat ration field test video, someone said, "Good job you didn't come from Charmouth End, massive cliff fall." So just a couple of days after I had that abortive visit to Seatown, and I didn't even go along the beach actually because the tide was a long way in, and it didn't seem to be receding in the manner I expected it to. A couple of days after that, there was a huge cliff fall at Stonebarrow, which is in between Seatown and Charmouth. Massive section of the cliff came down and covered the beach and destroyed the cliff path as well. Well, actually didn't destroy the cliff path just fell off the cliff. The weird thing is, I was planning to walk that. That day I was at Seatown, my initial plan was to have walked all the way along the Seatown beach, round the headland at the end, underneath Golden Cap, along Charmouth Beach, and then back along the cliff path. I didn't do that, partly because I couldn't get onto the beach because the waves were too big and the tide, as I say, there was a storm surge and the tide was not going out like it should have been, or like I expected it to, rather. But also, I got talking to somebody on the seafront there while I was waiting, and they said they'd come down from Golden Cap, and they talked about the massive cracks in the top of the cliff, where the cliff was detaching and starting to fall, and they said, yeah, any day now it's going to go. So that was part of my decision process not to go that route, although I wasn't expecting that much of a cliff fall. But yeah, it just goes to show you, you know, nothing's ever completely safe. Same video, but this was on the Chesil Beach part. I wonder if that peat could be dried out and used for fuel. So this is where there were huge blocks of peat had washed up from the storm from the seabed. And this stuff's called beaver peat. And there's a reason for that. This is the remains of a peat wetland that was there before Chesil Bank receded and covered it up. So thousands of years ago, there used to be, Chesil Bank was a lot further out to sea, possibly not standing up as much out of the water. It might have been actually mostly submerged. But there was a huge wetland and lagoon there, and it was populated by beavers before they became extinct in this country. And so those blocks of peat that sometimes wash up, beaver bones have been found embedded in that peat. I didn't know that at the time when I was walking along that beach, but that chunk of wood I picked up was very neatly cut. It was a section of like a sapling or something like that, about maybe this big. And it didn't occur to me at the time that that branch was very neatly cut across the grain. And I do wonder if that piece of wood might have been part of a beaver dam at some point and then buried in the peat, because it was just very neatly cut, and if I recall correctly, ever so slightly conical on the end, which would be typical with the finish that a beaver would leave on there, having chewed all the way through the branch. They typically leave the ends of the cut branches and trunks conical because that's just the way their teeth work. So I probably ought to go back there and have a look at the pieces of wood embedded in those bits of peat, maybe sooner rather than later, and see if I can see any that have got evidence of teeth marks from beavers. That'd be amazing, because it's thousands of years old, but yeah, that could be really interesting. Anyway, moving on, many questions about why my thumb was painted. For the last month, 6 weeks, I've had nail polish on my thumb. I did explain it in, I think, the last random stuff, maybe the one before, but I knocked my thumb when I was chopping firewood and I got an unsightly bruise there, and I chose to cover that up with nail varnish just to save your eyes really from seeing something quite unsightly. It is actually healing really nicely now, and it's got to the point where I don't think I need to cover it up anymore. It was very gross a week or two ago, and so you'll see some videos which might be still yet to be published where I've just put a plaster on it, a blue plaster or something, just to cover it up. But yeah, we've got to the point now where it doesn't need covering up again now, but I can't paint it at the moment because it's really uneven and wonky. When that's grown out, maybe once in a while for a bit of fun, I might paint a design on there, because I did have fun doing that. You know, I thought, okay, it's got to cover it up, but why not have a bit of fun at the same time? And so the design changed every week or so, and there's been a whole variety of them. And I think I might paint it just for the fun of it in some future thing. People will think I've hurt my thumb again, probably. But there you go. On the choc chip cookies video, I do enjoy the recipe diagram. Thank you. I'm glad you did. I found that necessary. I don't often take recipe books or recipes into the kitchen for a couple of reasons. One of those reasons is it tends to make a mess of your books, because your hands are often covered in food when you're cooking. And so following along in the recipe, yeah, a lot of the second-hand recipe books I've got have got stains from where they've been used in a kitchen. But the other one is just simply that my distance glasses, which is the ones I use typically when I'm cooking, are not very good for reading. Well, my eyes aren't very good for reading through them, is the reality of it. My reading glasses I'm fine reading with these, but they're quite uncomfortable for longer distances, just the way my eyes have developed as I've got older. And so if I'm trying to follow along with my distance glasses in a book with relatively small print, it's easy for me to either make a mistake or lose my place and skip a whole step. And so with the cookie recipe, I just decided to simplify it down to a little flowchart that I could follow and print out, and it would be less than a single page, and I could just follow and I wouldn't lose my place on it. But I do think actually that's not a bad way of expressing a simple recipe, to do it as a critical path diagram almost. Anyway, found it useful. I didn't lose my place in that recipe, and I might do some more like that. I imagine that's not original though. I imagine somebody has probably done that before, and maybe there's a recipe book out there that's formatted on that basis. Lots and lots of comments on the tripe video praising my apparent comprehension of French. Probably a couple of important things you should know about that. One is that my French is not as good as it might have appeared in that video. Suffice it to say, I've had a lot of practice reading menus. And so reading culinary French is more doable for me than, for example, speaking conversational French. If I had to speak French, if I had to write French, I'd be completely out of my depth. I can order food in a restaurant. Same thing in Spanish, and possibly nearly in German and nearly in Italian as well, maybe. But yeah, don't be deceived. My French is, you know, I'm not fluent in French. That was a bit of an illusion caused by the fact that the domain happened to be the ingredients and food-related blurb on the can. And I've had a fair bit of practice in that very narrow domain. But also, you know, bear in mind, I could have just as easily had a translation printed and out of camera shot. I could have been cheating there. So you shouldn't really probably assume that people are very competent at something if they've had a chance to fake it for the camera. I didn't fake it, by the way. That was genuine, but just as a cautionary note, what you see happening on the screen here is not necessarily a very good representation of reality. It's just worth remembering that. Still on the tripe video, lots of suggestions to try different tripes, and I'm totally up for it. So please try the Romanian traditional tripe soup. It's very creamy and Moorish. The best brand for the canned one is Scandia. You can find it at Romanian, Polish, and even Turkish supermarkets. I'll look out for that. Coming soon to Weird Stuff in a Can. Somebody else said, try Turkish tripe, have you? No, I haven't, but like I say, I'm up for it. You should try Juanita's Menudo. Yes, please, I will. If you haven't yet, try tripe à la mode de Caen. So that's a different French recipe for tripe, and again, I'm up for it. Interestingly, possibly the only formulation of tripe I'm really not that keen on is the way that it was traditionally eaten in this country, which was just boiled or steamed. Obviously washed and then boiled or steamed, and then served with vinegar and salt and pepper and onions. And my mum used to love eating it, but that doesn't appeal to me so much. But when it's cooked in a rich sauce into a stew or a soup, really quite like it. I have a feeling that menudo and the various Spanish and Polish and that Catalan version, I have a feeling they're all fairly similar. So it's tripe in a red tomatoey peppery sauce, probably all quite similar, but different enough to make it worth exploring. So yeah, coming soonish, or as soon as I can get my hands on some, to the Weird Stuff in a Can series, more tripe. On the drink can tin work, I watched this 15 years ago, still it's good. Now 2026, wow. Thank you, and I'm glad that older videos are still entertaining people. It's really good to know. I ought to revisit that craft, actually, drink can tin work. The videos about it are really quite old, and production quality has improved a little bit since then. So perhaps I should revisit that, because also the other thing that's happened is that back then I used to have to sand the labels, sand the printing off the can before I could use it. Now it's very common to get cans, or especially craft beers, where it's a completely plain can with a sticker on it that peels off really easily, and you end up with this lovely shiny silver can, which would be perfect for drink can tin work. So mental note to revisit drink can tin work as soon as I can. No pun intended. On the 100% apple pie, a really interesting question. It was an apple pie made from 100% apples, nothing but apples. So it was just dried apples, rehydrated with apple juice, dried apples pounded into a powder, rehydrated with apple juice, mixed together, formed into a pie, baked. There was nothing in there that wasn't apple derived. And it was a pie. It did only taste of apples because duh. But here's an interesting question. If you were to permit yourself one additional non-apple ingredient, what would it be? Eggs, butter, flour? And what a tantalizing question, because what would you add if you could only add one extra thing to this all-apple pie? Would I add flour to make a proper crust? But then it's just an apple pie. Would I add butter to make sure that it didn't stick to the tin? That's a possibility, because also that would crisp up the crust a little bit if it fried in the tin. Obviously, it would have been nice to add some spice in there. A lot of people go to cinnamon for apple pies, but traditionally in England, it's often cloves. So a little bit of some kind of spice in there might have been quite nice. Cloves and nutmeg, maybe. Cinnamon, if that's your preference. But that's such a tiny thing. Is it worth expending your one additional ingredient on a tiny pinch of spice? Would it be something else that isn't even apples and isn't even apple pie? Like, would it be blueberries or blackberries or something? What a good question. I think the answer is butter. And I think it would just be that I would butter that little pie pan, then I'd be able to bake it the right way up inside the dish, which would have held it together. And I think the butter would have fried the outside of the crust and would have crisped it up and made it even more pie-like. But fascinating question, and I thank you for it. And finally, it's been a little while since we celebrated puns in the comment positivity section, but I always notice them in the comments, and I do love your puns in the comments. Here's one that particularly stood out for me on the Bee Hotel video. You sure it's a hotel and not an Airbnb? Sorry, I'll get my coat. I did enjoy that, and I always enjoy reading your puns, even if they make me groan. That's the whole point of puns. They make you groan, but it's a good kind of pain, if there's such a thing. Anyway, that's everything for this video now. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.